Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. So I'm going to do more than just talk about investor meetings. I also want to talk about who the investors are that you're going to be raising money from, maybe one day, and what motivates them. Because in order to have a good meeting, you need to know what you're doing and how to achieve that goal. So when we think about investor meetings, there's a question of when you need them, who you need them with, how to actually get the meetings, and actually how to do the meetings. This might seem weird, but a meeting isn't just walking into a room and sitting across the table from someone staring into each other's eyes. You need to actually talk. You need to make points, and you need to know what points to make. And Kirsty just ran you through the mechanics of what fundraising actually means. But in order to actually get the money from somebody, you usually have to know who they are, track them down, find them, convince them to meet with you, convince them to give you money, and then get the money in the bank. So there's a lot of steps that come up ahead of time. So this talk is kind of your magical plan to automatically raise money. If you follow these tips, no one will ever say no to you. If they do, it's your fault. All right, so the first thing is figuring out when you actually need to raise money, right? Not every business needs money. MailChimp, famously, has never raised $1 in outside financing and is worth billions of dollars. So before you think about whether or not or before you think about meeting with investors to raise money, you first need to answer the question of if you actually need to raise money. And there's a bunch of different steps in this. You can raise money when you're just at the idea stage. You can raise money if you just have a prototype. You can raise money when you have users. In fact, it gets easier and easier as you have each of these things because they're demonstrations of progress. But you need money when you actually need it to grow your business. And figuring out whether or not you need money to grow your business is a very particular decision about your company. So if you think about this, think about raising money as a continuum, right? If you have nothing and no understanding of how you would spend money if you had it, don't try to raise money. It's a waste of time. Instead, focus on building your product and building your company. If you get a little further along, you have your idea or your prototype, you start to see, oh, if I actually had a little more money, I'd be able to do X, Y, and Z, which would make me go faster. Now flip yourself into the mind of the investor and think about, okay, well, if I'm an investor, why am I giving this person money? I have to have a reason, right? And the reason is because I expect it to be very, very, very large one day. And I also expect them to be able to use this money appropriately. There are some uses that are good for money and some uses that I would say are bad. The first thing people always say about why they need to raise money is they need to hire employees. This is very attractive because companies love to talk about how many employees they have. It's a great metric when you don't have revenue or actual progress. But the truth is, because you are building startups, which hopefully leverage software, you need to hire far fewer people than you think you do. And in fact, hiring is the single best way to kill your company if you don't need to do it because people cost money. And so if you are already hiring, you already need money, whether or not your idea is any good, whether or not your idea is growing. So think very carefully about whether or not the blocker between you and the next step of growth is actually hiring. The next thing people love to say is, well, we need to do user acquisition. We need to spend money on Google Ads. This is usually a very bad way to grow your business, especially early. You start spending money on Google Ads and you start looking at your user numbers and say, look, our user numbers are growing up, so we need to pour more money into it. And what many people don't think, especially if it's their first startup, is whether or not they're acquiring people profitably, customers profitably, and whether or not they're doing that profitably on a timeline that allows them to recycle capital and keep growing. So before you start spending money on user acquisition, it probably makes sense to start acquiring people for free. Get users who love your product to tell their friends about how much they love the product. And then you get them for free and you don't need to raise money. Then some of you will need customer service. If your customers are getting angry because you're not doing enough to make them happy, you're not answering their questions, that's actually a pretty good reason to raise money, and is actually one of the first limiting factors that a lot of companies hit. And the reason this is a good one is because you, as founders, will be able to deal with customer service for quite a long time. And you'll only stop being able to do that when you have enough users and customers that you get overwhelmed. And what's interesting is that if someone's using a product that is free, their expectation of customer service is much lower, which means you can handle a lot more. And if they're paying you, your customer service level has to be higher, but you're making more money. So you can afford to hire more people to do customer service before you actually have to look for outside capital. Now, part of the reason I'm saying and warning so actively against fundraising before you're ready is the earlier you raise money, the more dilutive that capital is, right? People aren't going to give you a $3 million valuation, a $5 million valuation, a $10 million valuation, unless you have something to show them. So every dollar raised is more of your equity in your eventual multi-billion dollar business that you're giving away. You don't want to do that if you don't have to. Let's talk a little bit about the types of investors in your neighborhood. First, we have friends and family. Then there are accelerators, there are angels, there are seed funds, there are VC funds, and there's crowdfunding. There are so many different ways to raise money and so many different places from which to raise it. But the important thing in figuring out who these investors are, how to get meetings with them, and how to convince them that they should actually give you money is understanding a little bit about them, what motivates them, and how to get in touch with them. So first, let's talk about accelerators. Accelerators are basically investors that have education programs attached to them. YC is an accelerator, right? We take you in for 3 months. We work with companies. We try to make them better and better and better and better and better by teaching them what we know and helping them avoid mistakes. And then we launch them out into the world in demo day and give them a community on the other side. Now, there are thousands of accelerators all over the world. We see applications from all over the world, and I think the number of accelerators is proliferating faster than the number of startups. And this terrifies me because most of the people who are advising companies in accelerators have no idea what they're doing. They've never worked at a startup. They've never started a startup. They've never funded a startup outside of the accelerator. You got to ask yourself, why on earth should I take advice from this person who's never done any of the things that they're telling me I should do, never seen any of these things work? And actually what you notice is most accelerators actually hurt companies. So be very careful about going to an accelerator. None of you need an accelerator to succeed as a company. If the accelerator is helpful, that's great. But if not, it damages your company because of the word accelerate. If you do an accelerator, come out the other side, and you're the same or worse than you were when you started, it didn't accelerate you very well, did it? And every other investor that looks at you will look at you and think, that didn't work. What's it actually going to take to accelerate this company? It's probably not money. There must be something wrong with the founders. And it might not be you. It might have been the accelerator, right? That hurt you. So be careful and think very carefully and look at the track record that those accelerators have. Next up, friends and family. This is probably the most common source of funding for early stage startups at the earliest stages. Friends and family are moms, dads, rich uncles, Grammy and Pop, people who have hopefully a little bit of extra money that they can give you because it feels good. Let's be honest, your friends and family don't usually think you're going to build the next Google, right? They love you. They remember when you were in diapers. And they're basically giving you money because you have conviction that you can do something and they want to support you and be nice. Don't take advantage of that niceness. Only take money from friends and family if you know that they can afford to lose every single dollar that they give you. Because let's be honest, you're probably going to lose every single dollar they give you. Let that sink in. Most startups that raise venture capital do not produce a return. So be very thoughtful about whether or not you take money from friends and family. And don't make the terms really, really onerous. Don't raise $50,000 from your grandma at a $50 million valuation. That doesn't make any sense. You're probably going to get the inheritance anyway. So it just doesn't work. But seriously, if you artificially set a very high price at this point in your life, you can probably set the price because, again, they're being nice. But that makes every other fundraising you do increasingly difficult because the price is so high. When you do want money from a friend or a family member, treat it like a real meeting. Treat them as if they're real investors. Be respectful of their time. Go in with an actual pitch and an actual understanding of what you're doing. Not just, can you please give me money? Now, thank you. Right? Don't do that. Really treat this as an important thing because it'll help train you for the next stage of raising money, which is usually angels. Angels are basically rich people with a little too much time and money on their hands. They invest mostly as a sport. All right? Have you ever noticed on Twitter, angels will often say, oh, my $1 billion company this, my $1 billion company that. It's basically trophy hunting, right? You have no idea how much money they invested in those companies or whether or not they actually made money or whether or not the money that they made is meaningful to them. But they really like to invest in new companies. And there's actually a lot of reasons. It's actually not just about trophy hunting. There's a lot of angels who invest because they really want to see new technologies exist. Or because when they were new founders, someone gave them a chance and they want to pay it forward. Angels are usually pretty easy to get in front of because professional angels are easy to get in front of. All they want to do is invest in exciting, new, interesting companies and spend time with founders who make them feel interested, right? And who teach them things. So email them. And if they seem really, really busy, you can usually network to them pretty quickly, especially if they're local. Whatever city you're in, pretty much around the world, has at least a few angels. The one last thing I would say about angels is that you should be careful of angel groups. I forget what they're called, but there are basically these groups of angels that like to get together for meals and grill new founders and then not invest. And it's this sport of ripping people apart because they're successful investors or something, and they just want to show you how good they are. So before you take money from, or before you go chase an angel down, do some research ahead of time to figure out whether or not they actively invest. That's the signal. Have they made an investment in the last 6 months, 12 months, 5 years, 10 years? They haven't made an investment in a year or two. They're probably not investing actively. So it's probably not a good idea to waste your time chasing them down. Next up the capital stack is seed funds. Seed funds are kind of super professional angels who have raised some amount of outside capital that they are investing. They're usually investing on behalf of angels who maybe don't have enough money to be LPs in really big funds. These are usually newer but professional investors who are trying to learn the ropes. They're often great. They're often recent founders. They're probably pretty aggressive about finding good deals. They have quick processes because they know they have to move quickly. Do research on them. Their whole job is to meet new founders who they want to talk to and invest in. So email them. Cold emails to these people are fine. If you can get a warm email, great. But you should just reach out to seed funds. Their entire job is meeting with you to see if they can invest in you. And remember that they are investing for a return so that they can raise their next fund. So they're not interested in things that are just going to produce a small return. They're not interested in lifestyle businesses, which an angel might be interested in investing in if there's cash flow. They need you to return capital. Then there's the VC funds. These are obviously the big deal in fundraising. VC funds run the gamut. There are VC funds that invest $1 million checks, and there are VC funds that invest $1 billion checks. Know what you need for your stage of capital. They all have, or almost all have, multiple LPs, which are limited partners, who give them money and say, hey, we need you to produce X% return on an annual basis. It's called an IRR target. And these people, these LPs, are looking across all the venture funds in the world and saying, where can I allocate money? And then they're looking at all of the different alternative asset managers and saying, where can I allocate money? And then they're looking across all of investable assets and saying, where can I allocate money? And so if I'm a VC partner, if I'm a GP, I have to think, not only do I have to be one of the better VCs, I have to return more at a better risk than anything else this investor could put money into for me to get that LP capital. So when they're looking at you, they don't just need you to return 5 or 10x. They're looking at every single investment and saying, will this investment return my entire fund? So as you're thinking about how to meet with these people, right, you got to think about, oh, shoot, when I walk into that meeting, I can't just pitch a small vision of what I'm doing. I got to do something big here. Now, VCs, when they invest, usually have a pretty specific structure of what they do and how they make decisions. You might meet with a partner at first, and then 2 partners and 5 partners, and then the whole general partnership if you're raising something like a Series A. But at the earlier stages, most of the bigger VC funds can make a decision off a meeting with one single partner. So if you're all thinking about sort of that first check, probably don't even think about these guys. This comes later in the process when you're ready to raise a lot of money. The last kind of investor that I can think of is crowdfunding websites. These are a little bit of a strange thing to think about when it comes to, say, a meeting or getting in front of them, because they split. There's crowdfunding that can be done via syndicate, where there's one person who's kind of like an angel who has a bunch of money from other people to say, hey, we're going to invest in this thing, and then everyone follows them along. They work kind of like professional investors do, where you'll meet with them, talk to them, then they'll say, hey, we're going to back you. Can we put you on? There's private syndicates and public syndicates. You do not have to meet with every member of a syndicate in order to raise money on a crowdfunding site. And there's also the option on many crowdfunding sites to simply list your company, subject to a few checks to make sure you're not committing fraud, where they'll just put you up and then people will send money your way without you ever meeting anyone. This is a good way to raise money if you can't figure out another way to do it, or there's no investors near you, or you don't want to be bothered with the time. It's usually not a good way to raise lots and lots and lots of money because, one, it's usually not there, and 2, if you have all of these individual tiny little investors on your cap table, they become a nightmare to manage. So think carefully about this option and think about what it will do for you and what it can do to you. So a couple of these investors, as I mentioned, are susceptible or open to receiving cold emails. Actually, everyone is receptive to cold emails. I think I respond to pretty much every cold email I get if I can. But there's good ones and bad ones. So here's a bad cold email. Dear sir or madam, I have noticed in my research on the internet that you are an investor in technology companies. I'd like to introduce you to an opportunity to make money in this new and exciting field. May I come to your office for an hour to present you with this opportunity? Sincerely, Aaron. I would not take a meeting with this person. I have no idea what they do. They don't seem to have done any work to understand what I'm interested in, who I am, what I've done in the past, and they're asking for an hour of my time in person. That's a lot of time. Remember that professional investors, sure, they meet with people all day long, but the only thing that limits them is their time. And so they want to give that to the people who matter most. So how do you think about sending a good cold email? The answer is by doing research. Most investors are very happy to tweet about things that interest them, companies they've invested in. They write blogs about ideas that they have and companies that they want to see exist. They have prolific profiles online based on the companies that they've started in the past. You should go and research every single investor that you want to talk to and figure out a way to get in front of them with a custom introduction that is relevant to them and to you. So here's one you could send to Adora. Adora, I'm building a marketplace for home cleaners. I have a novel approach to this. All of the cleaners are robots. We've launched and are just starting to grow. So let's stop for a second. If you've done research on Adora, you know that she built a marketplace for home services. So you know that this is relevant to her. You also might know she thinks robots are cool. So that's another good hook. You tell her the stage that you're at, launched and are just starting to grow. Now, launched is great because it proves that you're actually doing things. Starting to grow is intriguing because it makes me want to ask, how much are you starting to grow? How fast? How are you measuring growth? How do these things work? Then, I think you'd be a great investor for us because of your experience with HomeJoy. I think we've solved unit economics and reliability. Can we discuss this for 15 minutes? Happy to email if that's better for you. Sincerely, Aaron. So let's think of all the different things here that are good. You've only asked for 15 minutes of time. That's easy and can be done by the phone. You also offered to do it over email. If Adora happens to be busy or is traveling, she can just deal with the first set of questions over email. I love to do this. I always go to email first, and if someone really gives good email responses and is thoughtful and asks good questions, I'm much more inclined to meet them and be happy when I'm meeting them. Walk into the meeting with a positive understanding of what they're doing and context to understand the entire conversation. Right? That's a prepared mind for what you're thinking of doing. You reference her past with HomeJoy, and you'll know if you watch some of Adora's lectures and videos online that she thinks a lot about unit economics and reliability. So you know that these things are important, and you're saying, we've solved these two key critical issues that are important to you. This is a slam dunk, right? This is a cold email that is likely to get a response, whether or not you know the person you're emailing, because it's so specific. It's the same thing, by the way, if you are sending lots of email to people you don't necessarily know to try to convince them to use your service. There's a big difference between spamming people, right, and sending them a relevant email about a relevant service that they will find interesting. Don't spam investors. It doesn't work. They're immune to it. Investors are not usually sitting around waiting for an email from someone they've never met, introducing them to an investment opportunity. What they are waiting for is the company that no one else knows, that is secretly amazing, that nobody else has talked to yet, that has no connections. That is the company that if you find it and is actually as good as it seems, that's the one that makes you all of the money. So an investor who gets a cold email this good is already starting to think, oh crap, this is my Google and no one else knows about it. I better move fast, meet them, figure out what's going on, give them a bunch of money, and then help them IPO. That's the response you want to get out of someone. In fact, that's what you want to walk out of every meeting with, an investor who's excited to move on to the next steps. Now, as you move through meetings with investors, there are a whole bunch of different meeting types that you'll have to navigate. And different investors do different kinds of these meetings. So let me list them and then I'll walk through a little bit more about what they are. First up, there's the intro meeting. All investors do intro meetings, except the crowdfunding sites. Then there's a follow-up meeting. Pretty much all investors do this, except some angels who might decide to invest in you after that first meeting. Then you've got the decision meeting. This is really only professional investors. This will be a meeting with multiple partners, or with that one partner, but to really dig in and make sure that they want to do the deal. After, well, depending on how competitive your fundraise is, which is a whole other set of things, there's diligence. A diligence meeting might be with you, might be with your team, might be with your lawyer. Sometimes it's handled by the VC themselves or the investor themselves, and sometimes it's handled by someone on their team. And then finally, if it all goes according to plan, you get fancy dinners. Fancy dinners are the goal. Not raising money for your company, getting to eat for free. Different investors will use fancy dinners differently. Sometimes it's used to sell you on an offer that they've made where they really want to get to know you better and show you how great they are. And then usually after everything's done, you can finagle a closing dinner out of someone. In all seriousness, though, the reason that I put this on here is that every investor that you take onto your cap table is going to be with you for the life of your company. You need to make sure that the people you're taking money from aren't jerks. If you can't sit through an hour dinner with someone, you should think very carefully about whether or not you want to take their money. This is a little less relevant at very early stages with small check sizes from angels, but anyone who's giving you a material amount of money, you need to think very carefully about whether or not you want them there. All right. What you need for each of these meetings changes. The intro meeting is really simple. All you really need is a clear explanation of your idea. That's actually the base level of everything. A super clear. This is the elevator pitch, right? The reason this is important is because research shows that people make decisions about what they want to do in an interview, sometimes in the first 30 seconds of a meeting, right? You can't necessarily get to yes in 30 seconds, but you can often get to no. And if someone comes in and cannot explain what they do, that's a really bad sign. So make sure you really understand what it is that you want to say and how you want to explain it. If you have a demo of what you've built, that's awesome. Investors love to engage with real products and see. And not only do they want to see that because they love playing with things, this is evidence that you are doing the things that you were saying you're going to do. The entire purpose of meeting with investors is to show them that you are inevitably going to be gigantic. And progress is critical to that. I would also recommend having a reasonably clean shirt. Doesn't have to be spotless. I understand what it's like to be a founder. But don't show up looking like you just rolled out of bed all rumpled. You can get away with that sometimes. But again, people unfortunately judge based on first impressions. And if you walk into the room looking like you don't give a crap about the meeting, the investor isn't going to give a crap about the meeting. If you get past the intro, you're going to get to a follow-up meeting. Again, except for the angels that invest off the first meeting. Follow-ups start to dig a little more deeply into your business. So you need to understand your metrics. Now, in some cases, this will be the metrics that your business already has. And in other cases, it'll be the metrics that your company will have in the future. So if you're building a consumer business, but you haven't launched yet, you need to have a framework for understanding that monthly actives are important to you, or weeklies, or dailies, or hourly actives are important to you, and talk about how you're thinking about those things and how you're going to focus on them. You need to be able to explain your progress up to now. And remember that progress isn't an absolute value. Progress is a slope. How long have you been working on what you're working on, and how far have you gotten in that time? If you've been working on something for 5 years and have yet to launch, not great. If you've been working on it for a month and have a prototype ready, that's amazing. So it's all relative. And you want to be able to dig a little more deeply on your insights into why you're doing what you're doing than you did in that first introduction meeting. Remember that introduction meeting can be 15 minutes. It could be an hour, but it's probably pretty short. So this is your chance to show just how much you understand about what you're doing. When you get to an actual decision meeting, this is really when you need the deck. Again, this is mostly for professional investors. Most angels don't need to see a deck. It's not really that relevant. I kind of think that some people spend more time on their deck than they do working on product, which is usually a bad trade because customers don't generally buy decks. Some do, but that's just weird. So you need to have your deck, and the deck doesn't have to be long. Actually, the simpler the deck, the better. This deck is really, really long that I'm running through today. If you're a seed company, 8 slides, maybe 10, your opportunity, your team, what you're going to build or what you've already built, and your early metrics. That's it. I actually put up a sample slide deck on the YC blog. Go check it out. It's really short. You can actually just use that deck and replace your name with the deck company, I think is what it's called. At this point, if you have metrics, you need to know them cold. If someone asks you what 6-month or 12-month retention is, know it off the top of your head. Don't have to pull up your computer and look for it. Obviously, there are levels and layers of metrics underneath that you don't need, but any top-level metric that's important, know that. And for your most important metrics, be able to dig in a couple layers. The critical part of a decision meeting, and again, this is because this is for professional investors, is that you need to take where you are now and project what the biggest future actually is. I remember when I sat down and pitched Sequoia for my decision meeting. It was like me and 5 partners in the room. And the thing that they really dug in on was what my company could be in 10 or 15 years. And that was all they cared about at that point. They were already sold on the basics of the business at that point. They were sold mostly on me, but the thing that they wanted to understand, I think, is how I thought about the future and whether or not they thought I could actually do that thing. Could we become a globe-spanning company? Because again, that's the only thing they care about. And your ability to dig into that and explain it is the difference between whether or not you're just another company or something with huge vision that they think you can achieve. After that comes the diligence meetings. These meetings aren't usually that hard on you if you've done your homework ahead of time. And again, this is later. The earlier in your life as a company, the less diligence you have. Make sure you have your legal docs in order. Make sure your financials, if you have them, make sense. We've seen some really insane things come up during diligence where a company has, 50% less cash than they thought they did. Don't do that. It's usually some other problems at work if that happens. And have a metrics dashboard. Again, if you have the metrics, be able to bring up your full dashboard so that people can really dig way down into everything that you're doing. So if you walk through all of those things, if you understand the framework for your meetings, you'll get to the final step, which is that fancy dinner. There is food, and you'll need another reasonably clean shirt. But this is the end, and doesn't even necessarily happen. And honestly, even if it doesn't, the thing that you were trying to get to is actually money in the bank. Whether or not an investor takes you out for a meal, or an investor seems fancy, or other people think the investor is cool, none of that matters, right? At the end of the day, the thing that you need as a company, if you need money to grow, is just money. And honestly, all of these meetings are irrelevant if you can get that money without them. So never put yourself in a position where an investor that you have researched is great. You know they're great. They email you and say, hey, I'm traveling this month, but I really want to invest. Can I send you $250,000 and we'll catch up afterwards? Don't say no because you haven't met for coffee, right? I'd recommend getting on the phone with them and chatting with them and trying to do your own diligence, right? Check references, but don't turn people down just because they haven't fit into whatever we believe or you believe is the perfect process. A few things to remember about meetings, about investors. Most importantly, meetings do not equal progress. I run into so many founders who tell me all about all of the different meetings that they're having and how they met with this person and that famous person. It's irrelevant. The only thing that matters is building a big company. And if you are meeting with investors when you don't need to raise money, you are taking your time and focus away from the thing that matters, which is building the big company. So only start meeting with investors when you know that you need money. When you are in a fundraising process, the only thing that counts as a yes, I will invest is yes, I will invest, signed documents, and wired money. Investors hate saying no because every time they say no, they close off the opportunity to invest in something that's going to make them a lot of money, and they risk looking stupid for having said no. So they will do everything they can not to. What I've actually found is the best investors are the ones who will say no fastest. Not say yes fastest, who will say no fastest. Because they're the ones who understand what it is they're looking for and how to make decisions quickly. And if you find yourself in a situation where you're going out and meeting after 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 meeting, nothing takes that long. Right? This is a gamble. And at some point, someone has to make a decision, and indecisive investors usually don't make good decisions. So when you're meeting with people, push to a close. The final piece is a warning for you to watch out for. I hate having to talk about these things because I wish they didn't happen, but they do. The first piece of bad behavior is what I just mentioned. Investors who just waste your time. This is honestly kind of harmless, but just watch out for it. The next thing is investors who are jerks. This takes lots of different forms. There are investors who will try to impress you with how much money they have, who will try to impress you with the people they know, who will talk down to you because you're new and they're old. There are investors who will try to make you feel as if your idea is stupid without giving you any help or understanding of where their thought process is coming from. Don't take it. If someone's a jerk, leave. Or say, hey, you're being an asshole. I have a lot of people that I can talk to, and I'd rather not talk to you. Thanks. Don't be a jerk yourself, but be honest, be forthright, and leave a meeting if you have to, if someone's being a jerk. Don't take another meeting with them, and then tell your friends that this person was a jerk to you. This behavior corrects itself pretty quickly. Now, sometimes people are being jerks without realizing it. They just think that's what they're supposed to do, or they're not so good in social interactions. Try giving feedback if that happens, and see what happens. There are investors who will meet with you just to do diligence on you for one of their portfolio companies. This is usually pretty obvious because they'll just ask you question after question after question after question about like process and metrics and who your suppliers are and who your special relationships are and what are their phone numbers and when can they go see them, and can they introduce you to someone else who seems to be working on a competitive product. But no, don't worry, it's not really a competitive product. Oh, wait a second. So before you meet with someone, just check to see if they are already invested in competitors and talk to them about it ahead of time. For a lot of investors, they explicitly say we're happy to invest in competitors over time and we compartmentalize information. Actually, YC does this. We are happy to invest in competitors. We sometimes do it in the same batch. We tell both companies we're doing it, but we'll do it in the same batch and we'll do it across batches. And we've developed a system whereby we're very careful about what information can or would be shared. And violating that trust is something, keeping that trust sacred is something that we are very serious about. The last thing, and this has importantly become an issue, is harassment. This could be sexual harassment, it could be racism, it could be any kind of bigotry. Unfortunately, wealth has absolutely no relationship to morality, right? And investors, some of them are not good people. I'll say most of the investors that I interact with regularly are great, but there are some bad apples. And we just released a report this week talking about just how many YC founders have experienced sexual harassment, and the numbers were way higher than I would have possibly imagined. So if you encounter anything like this, this is absolutely grounds to walk right out. No one should ever be allowed to make you feel as if you have to do anything for them to get their money other than build a big company. No one should ever be allowed to violate your personal space or make you feel uncomfortable. If it happens, walk away and tell us. We're starting to get better at dealing with this, and we would much prefer a situation in which no investor meeting ever goes in a way where someone ends up feeling uncomfortable. So, that's how to think about investor meetings, how to think about when you need them, how to get them, who to do them with, and how to do them. I really think that if you follow these steps, everything will always go perfectly for you. At least I hope it does. Thank you all so much, and I think we have time for questions. Yeah.
So is it wise to approach VC who's already invested?
Is it wise to approach a VC who has already invested in a competitor? It's incredibly case dependent. If they invested in a competitor 10 years ago, that company is public, they might actually be a perfect investor for you because they know the playbook and they'll help you IPO. But you need to just look at the specific situation and decide whether or not it makes sense.
Between the seed angels and micro VCs, what is the current sort of average round of investments? There's a lot of information on the web, but I don't know how to.
Between the seed funds, the angel funds, and the micro VCs, I didn't even talk about micro VCs. I'm never sure what they are. What's the average check size and round size? It's dependent not just on, it's dependent, there's so many variables. The investors, the market, the geography, the company and what it needs. I mean, there are seed rounds that get done for $50,000 and seed rounds that get done for $10 million. So it's really dependent. I think the way to think about it is more, what do I need? Smaller funds and angels are most likely to write small checks, somewhere between, I don't know, $10,000 and $100,000, and larger funds are beyond that.
It's pretty easy to figure out which VCs are credible, but how do you figure out which angels are credible?
How do you figure out which angels are credible? Ask them for references. look at their portfolios. Angel List usually, if someone's an active angel, Angel List usually records what they do and what they've invested in. And again, angels who are really active tend to talk about it a lot. Not for a bad reason, actually. By talking about it, that's how they get deal flow, right? If you know someone's an active angel, you're going to approach them. So you should be able to do some amount of diligence. Obviously, this is harder in emerging markets where there isn't as large of an investor ecosystem, but you just have to do the footwork to figure it out.
Can you talk about the mechanics of investor FOMO?
Can I talk about the mechanics of investor FOMO, or fear of missing out? That would be a whole hour's worth of conversation. The basic idea, though, is investors want to invest in the largest companies they possibly can and get as much ownership as they possibly can. But at the early stages of a startup, there's very little data to say whether or not this company is likely to succeed. And so investors are always looking for other pieces of confirmatory data, essentially. One of the most powerful pieces of that data set is whether or not other smart people seem to think this is a good idea. And so the reason FOMO exists is because if you see other smart investors getting in on something, you infer that that company is good and likely to be big. And you don't want to miss out on that. And so that's why a lot of investors sit back and wait for someone else to make the move. I think those are generally the less good investors. Again, the best investors really are the ones who make their own decisions faster than anyone else. And actually, the best investors are the ones who have incredibly fast diligence processes. So they are the ones way out ahead of everyone. You can still pressure them a little bit by having other investors lined up behind so they know that they have to move quickly. But that's the shortest possible answer I could give you on it.
Do you see founders making any common mistakes when communicating their vision to investors?
Mistakes that founders often make while communicating vision. Some go too big in a way that makes them seem scattered. So if I were to pitch you on a company that is, well, we're a search engine. We also have self-driving cars. We make phones, speakers. We built this crazy balloon that beams the internet down. Ooh, we have ads and display ads and artificial intelligence and a whole department that just works on crazy ideas. You'd say, oh, this is a lot even for me, right? So that's kind of going too big. It'll make you seem scattered. And on the other side, sometimes people go too small and they say, well, if we're going to conquer 10% of our market that's worth $50 million and we're going to 100% of it. Okay, then what? Right, so there has to be a there that isn't too wild. Those I think are sort of the two extremes to think about.
I would think family and friends, after that family or friend member meets the criteria, can afford to lose that money. Any other advice you'd give in terms of taking it seriously and going in the right order with family and friends? Who, after that criteria, is the next thing to look at?
How do you pitch family and friends who can afford to lose money? No, I think that's very dependent on your relationship with those friends and family. If I wanted Jeff to give me money, I'd camp out outside of his house and show up every morning with donuts and coffee. I think that would get to him pretty well. No, but seriously, I think it really depends on who it is. I'd recommend working on an elevator pitch, maybe even a deck, just for practice, right? That's the friendliest audience you're ever going to get. Now, this is different, by the way, if your friends and family happen to be incredibly successful founders who know what they're doing or are venture investors. Then you can use them as real practice and say, hey, here's how I'm planning on building my business. You built a business. Does this make sense? So as much ask for advice as much as you're asking for money in that case, and really just treat it like a professional interaction.
Do we have to drop everything that we're doing to fundraising? If so, for how long?
Do we have to drop everything we're doing for fundraising? And if so, how long? Pretty much yes. You're either fundraising or you're working on your company, which is why you shouldn't try to fundraise unless you need it. And for how long is however long it takes.
I mean, like average.
I mean,
should we compare prepared to take 2 months, or should we be more?
I mean, you should be prepared to take 6 months, a year. I mean, it really depends. Now, if you are a very early stage company and it's taking you a year to fundraise and you're not working on your product for a year, that's probably pretty bad, right? That means you're not making any progress. So I wouldn't do that. But again, this is a question of figuring out whether or not you really need money. If you're just starting out, you try to raise money for, I don't know, a month or two, no one's giving you money, I'd say try to figure out how to grow without raising anything, and then come back later.
Some places advocate that only first women founders. What do you think of that?
Sorry, some investors only fund women founders. What do I think of that?
A little bit like kind of trend out something.
Yeah.
Only investing women founders. And
I think that's great. I think that the way that I think about fundraising and company building in general is press every unfair advantage that you have. This is a corrective narrative where there's investors who are specifically trying to fund female founders because investors have been pretty bad at that in the past. And if you can use that to your advantage, you absolutely should. I think it's great. One more?
Should all founders be included in the fundraising process? Or should you say that one specific founder should be focused on that and the other?
Yeah. Should all founders be focused on the fundraising process? No. This is the CEO's job. If you are lucky enough to have co-founders who can do other things, have them do other things. Again, that will help you not completely stop progress on the business while you're fundraising, right? If you can, you want to keep pushing the business forward while the CEO goes and fundraises. With the professional investors, the venture investors, for larger, later rounds, they're eventually going to want to meet the entire team, but they don't need it at the beginning. And in fact, you shouldn't bring the entire team to meetings for the following reason. If you are in an investor meeting and someone makes you an offer, if the entire team is there, you have to make a decision on the spot. But you're at a severe disadvantage there because professional investors professionally negotiate and make offers. You've probably never done this before. If the rest of your team is back home, you can say, thank you so much for that offer. It's really interesting. I need to talk about it with my co-founders. And then you can go back and talk to your co-founders and buy yourself some time to really think through the pluses and minuses. Thank you all.